look them in the eye and say, if I turned this off tomorrow, if I took it away from you, how upset are you going to be? And if they kind of go, yeah, Andrew, I'd be sort of upset. I don't think you have something of value.
Today's guest is Andrew Thompson, the CTO of Orbital, the AI platform built specifically for real estate legal work. Orbital isn't a generalist legal tech tool, it is a purpose-built tool for real estate legal, with around 5,000 property professionals on the platform and a chunky 60 million Series B closed back in January. In this episode, Andrew and I discuss a three-leg tripod every legal AI product needs to get right: accuracy, regulation and insurance, and why software engineering is the crystal ball legal should be staring into to see what's coming in 12 to 18 months down the line.
Just look to software engineering and you'll see it coming. And a lot of people have the defensive reaction of, it won't happen to us, it's structurally different. You get a very practical view into what's about to happen sort of 12, 18 months from now. And
before we get into the conversation, the statistics say that many of the listeners to the podcast aren't actually subscribed to the Best Practice podcast or newsletter. So a quick favour from me, if you love what I do and you're a regular viewer of the show, please check to see if you are actually subscribed, and in return, I'll make sure I bring on the biggest and greatest guests in the legal AI space onto the Best Practice podcast. Andrew, pleasure to have you on the Best Practice podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. For anyone that doesn't know who you are and what you do, what is it that Orbital does and what is it you do at Orbital?
yeah, firstly, thanks for having me, George. So I am the CTO at Orbital. In terms of the CTO, sort of typical CTOs oversee technology, but I'm sort of different in one respect. I also oversee sort of all of the product function, so sort of figuring out sort of what products to build for our customers, what problems do we actually want to solve, and then also sort of overseeing the domain. I've done this sort of across a number of different businesses, but at Orbital at the moment we're focused on real estate legal, and I oversee sort of real estate lawyers. So I have the typical software engineers, AI engineers, product managers, designers, and then also have these real estate lawyers both here in the UK and in the US. And for those who don't know Orbital, we're AI built for real estate legal. So we're not sort of a generalist legal tech platform. There's obviously sort of many that are available at the moment, but we really specialize in real estate and real estate legal. Last year we did 5,000 properties. We have about 5,000 property professionals on our platform. We did over 200,000 transactions in the US and the UK last year, and raised a chunky 60 million Series B just in January.
Wow, for a Series B, that's insane.
Yeah. The sign of the times, really. AI, legal tech is sort of a hot space at the moment, and I think there's a lot of sort of disruption and a lot of lot to play for and a lot of product to build. And so I think just the industry and investors have seen that, we've seen that, and I think it's a good time to be building.
Now, Andrew, I want to zoom out a bit and look at your career to becoming CTO at Orbital, right? So you started off by founding your own legal AI company, and then you helped to build the Caffè Nero app, and you also worked briefly at Appear Here. Now, what are the threads that connect all of those together, and then how did you end up as CTO at a real estate law startup?
Yeah. I think from my standpoint, ultimately I'm a builder at heart, so you can put me on sort of lots of different problems. But I think it's more just my curiosity level, like what has fascinated me. I think AI has always fascinated me. And physical space. And so if you sort of go to Caffè Nero, obviously it was a mobile app, it was a digital wallet. You would go to Caffè Nero to buy your coffee or your croissant here in the UK. But like these were, I think at the time there was about 600 physical spaces across the UK, Scotland and Ireland. This was where, people got work done. It's where they sort of hung out and relaxed. It was an app. You sort of the AI component behind it. So there's sort of the physical space that matters to people. And then the AI was just, how can you take what people are actually buying? I like coffee, maybe George, you like tea. And then over time, how do I sort of package you up from a marketing perspective to ultimately deliver you notifications on an app that are really insightful, as opposed to just the generic, hey, George, would you like a free coffee? And you're like, I'm George, I don't like coffee, I like tea. So that was sort of the Caffè Nero, and a thing similar to Appear Here. It was at the time an Airbnb for the high street type model. So we went to landlords, some of the biggest and smallest landlords in London, Paris, New York, Milan, Amsterdam. We got spaces, And then we sold them or sort of rented them out to brands, whether it was sort of the latest, hottest, D2C, direct to consumer or pop-up brand that sort of powered the pop-up economy before the pandemic, to, Chanel, Dior, Nike, Adidas that needed a space for a day, a month, a year, just sort of depended. But instead of buying, 20-year leases, we could kind of package up physical space in some of the best cities in the world a little different. Again, at Appear Here, we talked about sort of domain experts. I didn't have real estate lawyers on my team, but I had real estate brokers who would, using data, go and find what spaces brands actually wanted. There's a lot of space in cities that some brands don't want, but they would come to us and say, we want this type of space, this type of frontage, we need this, these amenities in it. We would go and source that space. We would know how much brands are willing to pay for that at what time of the year. You imagine, Q4 just before Christmas, really hot time for retail, whereas January, a bit more of like fitness brands are interested. And so again, sort of pricing with AI, but also having that physical space that ultimately powered a lot of great experiences in Paris, New York, and London and other cities around the world. I did obviously work with real estate lawyers, especially when we were leasing all of these spaces. And I think that's how I got familiar with just the process of turning great cities into even better cities by sort of utilizing their physical spaces. But you obviously needed real estate lawyers involved when you got down to the nitty gritty of needing to transact that space. And so the bridge to Orbital, when I found out that there was a business that it was sort of really small, just getting going by the time I started talking to the founders, it sort of made perfect sense. We needed AI to really crack this problem and think like a real estate lawyer and sort of help the industry. But at the same time, it was still the sort of bedrock of sort of underpinning how we buy, sell, and develop real estate in some of the best cities in the world.
So there was an AI machine learning element to your role at Appear Here, right?
Yes. Yeah, we did all sorts of stuff. It was both an AI from a pricing perspective, but I had one project that unfortunately I never quite got to completion because the pandemic hit, but I was actually installing devices in stores and measuring footfall that was walking by. And the thesis, especially for direct-to-consumer brands, was I'm paying Google a lot of money for impressions and clicks. And then depending on the quality of those clicks, they convert on my website into, people actually buying my product. And we know that, brands wanted to be in physical space, but it didn't have the same sort of attribution. So if we could somehow measure on Oxford Street in London, the amount of people walking by is a lot more than, let's just say, some of the alleyways in Soho, but it's the quality of that traffic. A lot of people are just commuting and not interested, in looking inside the window and then walking through the door. And depending on the hour of the day of the week, what percentage of that footfall would sort of actually cross the threshold depending on what business was in there. Was it a bicycle shop? Was it a hair salon? Was it a fashion brand? What type of fashion brand? We could that was just all data that would ultimately feed AI to predict for certain brands what are the best spaces. As I said, I wish I could, kind of have completed that project and COVID didn't quite happen. But that was sort of the vision to try to get that off the ground.
I suppose you could almost even link that up to the transactions going through the till.
That was the holy grail to do that. I think that was a little bit more work, but even my time at Caffè Nero, where we did put transactions through the till and you knew exactly who the buyer was and what they bought, obviously connected to sort of a physical device and an app that they logged in, I kind of was very much stitching together all of those skill sets, knowing that if you could do that holy grail, how many people walk by, how many come in, and how many actually purchase, and then what did they purchase exactly, that would be the holy grail from a sort of marketing perspective, ultimately for the brand, but obviously for the consumer, they just, can find the stuff they care about and want to sort of interact with far more easily than sort of it being a little bit more random.
Yeah, and now Orbital was incepted in 2018, right? So it came out in 2018, and the idea of AI for a lot of people was only from, ChatGPT, but actually it stems from machine learning, which has been going on for years and years and years and years. Yeah. Now, Orbital, I think, primarily were, focused on machine learning, and then ChatGPT 3.5 came out in November 2022. Can you tell me a bit about when ChatGPT came out? Did it basically reset everything you were doing at Orbital? Because, what drove that decision from going from classical machine learning on basically your own proprietary LLMs to then using and making the most of the generalist AI that was now on offer?
Yeah. So it changed lots of stuff, but also didn't, I think, change the sort of central mission. If you're totally right that I think, the story of the kind of 2000 teens was sort of classical machine learning, then deep learning. And that was sort of what I came in and what I spent a lot of my time working with AI products in some of the former companies, and then came into Orbital doing. My mandate was like, we know what we're doing, it's working, let's build sort of a data science team, a classical machine learning team to build that out. We were, I had domain experts on my time, paralegals, lawyers. We were essentially digitally highlighting real estate legal documents. Is this an alienation provision, or sort of what is the break date? We were collecting all of that labeled data. For all the kind of nerdy techie people in the room, we used to talk about, F1 scores going up and to the right and precision and recall. And you would understand sort of at what level of accuracy are your customers or your users of the product ultimately going to be happy with what you're doing. Just before ChatGPT, we were already experimenting with some of these transformer models, BERT and from Google model and T5, and you could start putting things into their context window and start kind of answering questions. And so, someone on our team kind of was like, look, there's something interesting here, but we hadn't quite sort of seen the forest from the trees. ChatGPT drops, and I think obviously the penny dropped for us as well, of like, okay, this isn't just something that we're kind of, if you squint, we can see. This is a very generalist platform that we can leverage to ultimately achieve what we wanted to do. And so I think it was hard at that time. If you back up then, ChatGPT obviously captured a lot of mind share. You could create a poem. I remember going home with my son and being like, check this out. You can create this kind of weird, funny poem with whatever you want, or you can dumb down some language that's really complicated and say, tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. But we're talking about real estate legal documents. Like, this is really difficult. It was GPT 3.5 at the time. It was slow. It was really expensive. It would answer some things, but you could tell the quality level just wasn't there. And so I think we had to take a very tough decision. In hindsight, it's obviously the right decision, but I've had a number of these over my career. Some of them have gone right, some of them haven't. But we took a sort of an opinionated stance. We sort of bet on the model that it would get cheaper, like radically cheaper. We bet that it would get faster, but the most important is we bet it would get sort of more intelligent and or more capable. And it was kind of maybe part luck, part skill, but a bit of a ludicrous bet. I think, they were baked in the right assumptions, but a lot had to go right. And we sort of looked at what we had currently built. We'd spent a lot of time and energy, and the team was motivated by the sort of more classical ML. We looked at sort of this thing that wasn't quite fit for purpose, but if it just got a little bit better and it stayed on that sort of conveyor belt for a while, it was abundantly obvious to me. And, huge credit to our VP of AI at the time, who I'd worked with across sort of a number of companies. He saw the writing on the wall and said, Andrew, we need to bet on this. And so we sort of, experimented a little bit, and then sort of took a big punt on it. And I think that played out. Not only did we bet on sort of the underlying LLM, but agentic was a big thing. Prior to a lot of the sort of technical underpinnings of agents being all the rage, we ended up building sort of the first agent, putting it in front of real estate partners. They wanted it, and we worked very closely with them to ultimately build something that was sort of accurate to a level that they wanted, and ultimately gave them something that sort of improved how they did their job, as opposed to just a fun toy that looked nice on the, shiny on the outside, but didn't quite perform. And we did that sort of soon after ChatGPT had been released.
So right now, are you still using OpenAI's and Anthropic's models, or have you kept any of that classical machine learning?
The vast majority of it are sort of this new like frontier LLMs from OpenAI and Anthropic. There still are things that LLMs can't do. So if you look at what they're incredibly good at text and reasoning over text, whether it's legal or code for software engineering. But visual elements, you can kind of do the experiment of take a picture of your fridge and, ask it to create you a recipe for dinner, and it'll do a decent job. But if you look at some of the highly complex, highly detailed real estate legal maps, surveys, plans, it just sort of falls over. It still feels like we're in the early GPT 3.5 era. And so you can still use an LLM as sort of the core, as the agentic kind of engine. But around that, depending on what you're doing, you may need to use some sort of classical machine learning elements. But as AI gets better, whether it's text, whether it's visual, you would sort of need to use probably classical machine learning less and less. I think it's abundantly clear the vast majority will be sort of given to LLMs over time. It's just a question of when. And I guess thinking about technology and product and putting something in our customers' hands that's actually valuable today, you have to make that trade-off. But it's more and more just becoming sort of frontier LLMs.
Well, yeah, I think the rates of how AI has been developing since even November 2022, and it's going to be 4 years this November, and it's got magnificently better, I think. I remember when 3.5 first came out, I was in my first year of sixth form, and I was doing chemistry, and before all my chemistry lessons we had like this booklet, and we had to do some prep work. We were getting probably leading to our brain rot and our downfall, but we were using AI to help us with the prep work, and it was explaining it really well. And I actually think, from an access to justice, access to education lens, it's really good because you can almost get a tutor quality level answer for free, which was amazing. Now I saw you operate a ship early and often philosophy. Now what does that mean to you? Why is that important, and what does it look like in practice day to day?
So I definitely didn't create this. It's sort of a school of thought that came before me around just sort of practitioners, people who are very pragmatic. It was sort of a lean school of thinking. And I think ultimately at the heart of it, as a sort of software engineer, and that's how I started my career, and then eventually thinking about sort of product is hard. You need to will something into existence that didn't exist before. And often you have to go through a lot of rejection, a lot of sort of prototypes that don't work. And so I think there's a number of ways that you can sort of approach that to de-risk. Ultimately, especially startups, we have a finite amount of capital. We have it's really difficult to hire people, and you're trying to match capital to talent and then actually sort of execute. And so how you do that most effectively is a bit of a philosophical decision for, sort of leaders in the team to decide. And I've always been of the opinion, contact with the customers is the ultimate true test. I've often worked with incredibly intelligent people, but if we locked in a room for too long, we overthink everything and we think we know better than the customer, or we've got really good rational ideas and really good stories to tell about why this thing would be better here and we should build it in this way. But some of the biggest failures of my career, it's been doing too much of that. We thought we were too smart for our own good, and ultimately at the end of the day, you can't predict everything. Whether it's the tiny little details, the way, the design of buttons are, or sort of how somebody trusts the product, or what exact tasks are worth selling to a customer. What are they actually going to get off their chair for and go, Andrew or Orbital, this is a product I want to invest in. It's really hard because it's just a chaotic, complex problem to add all of those variables together and go, I'm building something of value or not. And so I've always operated under the assumption of what is the smallest thing we can build to test out this idea that we, sat around in a room and thought it would be valuable, in this case for real estate lawyers. Let's, again, lots of people in Silicon Valley have this idea of if you're not embarrassed by when you ship too late. And so it's sort of under the same school of thought. It's just empowering myself, the team. It's okay. We're allowed to ship something that's sort of half-baked. Again, in a regulatory environment like legal, there's lots of ways that you could do that well or badly. We would partner with customers. They'd know it's very sort of alpha, but I think they really appreciated being right at the sort of tip of the spear, getting what, at least in this case, what can a frontier LLM actually do? There still is, and way back when was so much hype. They wanted to get their hands on something early as opposed to being told a story. And so it just sort of centered around this idea, trust customers, put something in their hand, iterate on it as much as they can. And then ultimately, I think the acid test for them, look them in the eye and say, if I turned this off tomorrow, if I took it away from you, how upset are you going to be? And if they kind of go, yeah, Andrew, I'd be sort of upset. I don't think you have something of value. Whereas if they're like, Andrew, do not do that at all, then you're like, oh, okay, I think I have something here that's actually valuable to them. And that's always been the loop that I've sort of tried to build teams around, of that sort of ship early and often to kind of get that validation.
That's a really good question, asking them, if I was to take it away, would you be mad? Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's also, almost giving all your customers the option to opt into the beta version of Orbital. What could Orbital look like if they wanted it to look like that? And I think it's all about communication and telling your clients it's not fully there, but this is what we're capable of. We want you to try it.
Yeah, and I think an important part in sort of enterprise software is not just, hey, we've got some shiny toy, we think you're going to like it, please buy it for the highest price, and then we'll go away and sell it to somebody else. these are businesses that are going to be around for a very long time. Whether they're law firms or businesses that manage or own sort of real estate assets around the world, and we've just been given an incredibly amazing but also complex and sometimes scary piece of technology. It's our job as sort of startups or sort of technology vendors to be like, this is a journey. It is where it is today. These are the flaws. These are the things it can do exceptionally better than what a human can do. This is how you can leverage it to sort of help your own business. And again, we've been in the market, at least with the Orbital product for, since sort of soon after ChatGPT launched. That product has gotten immensely more feature rich. It's gotten better. It's got more intelligent. And you have to sort of articulate to your customers day one where it is. And so they're sort of buying almost not into a product, but into a journey of sort of a series of products that they'll get over time, over the years. And I think that's ultimately what we're selling.
Now, Andrew, one of your products, Orbital Residential, comes with an almost AI insurance.
Yes.
Now, this means that if something were to go wrong, then it's down to Orbital to fix it rather than whoever's using it, whether that be the person on the other side. Why did you decide to take that risk upon yourself? And has it changed how the people who use Orbital Residential feel about the product?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if I have to take a step back, and I'm going to sort of simplify this quite a bit just for this conversation, but if you're building sort of a product in legal, or at least in real estate legal with us, I kind of think about three things. There's accuracy, or sort of how good is the product. There's the regulatory bit, and then there's insurance. And I think of those as sort of three legs of the tripod, where if any one doesn't exist, you've got a bit of a problem. And let's just remove software, entirely. If you go to a law firm that doesn't have insurance, you're going to ask some questions. If they're not regulated, you can probably ask a lot more questions, or hopefully the regulator will. And then if you have lawyers who aren't competent, you're not going to use them, and you're going to find, a better firm. And so that trifecta needs to come together. It's just so happened that, out of the gate, we've now got these things called AI or frontier large language models, and they're starting to kind of help on the accuracy point, whether they can do that completely, or in a lot of cases, they're just human real estate lawyers can leverage them to, produce, instead of having to read all the documents from 100 properties in a portfolio, I can get AI to sweep over that and tell me what the differences are and sort of drill down into them, way quicker. And so without anything else, the law firms regulated, they've got their own insurance, but they can leverage the sort of accuracy of AI. And so if we then take a step back, you're like, okay, well, at least until governments change, you can't really change the regulation. But on the insurance front, we insure humans who, especially in lawyers' case, are mostly accurate, but mistakes do happen. That's why insurance exists. Why can't we insure AI? And so I think to take on that risk, it's obviously a risk. It's a challenge for a business. But in the same way, law firms have decided it's in their best interests of their clients to be insured, to take that on and almost allow their clients to offload some of that risk to them. If you have a product that can do something, that's sort of a similar case. Obviously, that costs more money. That obviously means that, as a company, we have to take on some of the risk. But it's a risk worth taking, especially when we're doing it on the residential side. Obviously, UK, especially London properties are not sort of cheap, but they're a lot cheaper than sort of commercial glass towers in London. And so it's sort of a lot more commodified work than some of the commercial. And so we started there and allowed sort of the accuracy of the product to be wrapped in some AI reliance insurance that our conveyancing customers could decide to purchase or not.
That's really interesting. So do you sell it as an add-on, the insurance, or is it as an add-on? Okay, yeah. Interesting, because I've also seen 11 Labs, and so 11 Labs are going very much enterprise now. In their demos, they always use like an airport assistant call center or something, and you call them up and you're speaking to 11 Labs, and it's like, oh, I've missed my flight. When's the next flight available? And anyway, they're 11 Labs professional agents. You can now get insured on. I'm not sure whether that's an add-on, but most likely probably.
Yeah.
But
I think it's an add-on. We looked at that. I think it's a really good model, and obviously lots of companies are trying to do this. There are a lot of ways that the incoming data could be wrong, that could be misinterpreted, and ultimately I think it's a real marker of a company. Do you have skin in the game? If you're prepared to sort of take on the risk and back it with insurance yourself, the symmetry between I'm building technology, but I'm also prepared to take the risk of that technology if it goes wrong, I think it's a very clear signal to the market, and it's obviously quite financially profitable long-term. Insurance businesses are good businesses, and people, whether it's consumers buying travel insurance or law firms buying all types of insurance, it's a very needed thing in society. And so I think tech companies are trying to solve this. It's an unsolved problem in a number of domains at the moment, but I think we'll probably see over the coming years, especially as AI has got a lot more accurate, and we're kind of defining very clear boundaries. It's not just generic AI that can solve all problems. It's like I've got a very specific AI that solves real estate legal problems or autonomous driving, and you can then sort of get enough data to ensure those specific risks. And then ultimately the end users, whether you're driving a car or you're sort of a lawyer using a product or a client, you've got more trust that the incentives are aligned between the accuracy of the product and its underlying validity.
Yeah, like you said, it ultimately shows the company are confident enough in their product because they don't want to have to ever pay out if something goes wrong. Ideally.
No, 100%. Yeah, and I think if you do that too often, right? If you build some shoddy technology, your insurer is eventually going to pull the plug on it because it's just too expensive for them, and so it sort of keeps you honest to what you're building.
Yeah. Now, a lot of legal AI really forgets everything the moment that you close the chat. Now, ChatGPT and Claude have only in recent months, built-in context, so you can now turn on context. And it's kind of scary. Like I can ask Claude, tell me everything you know about me. Oh, you're a solicitor apprentice at blah blah blah. You have this newsletter. You live in this region. I'm like, what? Okay. Anyway, so you're building systems that are trying to retain context. Why do you think context is so important in legal AI and in real estate specifically?
I heard something the other day where like 80% of the problem that you're trying to solve with AI currently is about context. The last 20% is just sort of prompting it in the right way, asking the question or sort of steering it to the types of task you want to do. Without, and again, context is sort of this generic word, which just means, do you have the data to answer the problem? In legal, do you have all of the real estate legal documents, or are you missing one? Do you have the emails from the client? Do you have years of context about how that client likes to run their business? All of that, context, forgetting technology for a second, lives in lots of different places. It lives in the human brain, it lives in our email, it lives in documents, it lives just in sort of general practice guides for sort of how we, conduct business in certain verticals. And I think if you're missing one of those key contextual ingredients, you fundamentally are flawed. You can't actually answer all of the questions, or you can't perform the task adequately. And so I think that's why ultimately everybody's trying to figure out the models are smart enough. We clearly need to build this harness around it that makes it, in our case, act like a real estate lawyer and not a generic lawyer, or not something else. But even when you have that, you still need the context.
No, I think that's really important. And you mentioned, Orbital are trying to build the future of the real estate lawyer, right? So I think something that is really important for lawyers to have is judgment. And judgment comes through repetition, and repetition comes through, unfortunately, a lot of young people like me or paralegals having to do a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the repetitive and the mundane stuff. Now, if Orbital can reduce that due diligence, that mundane work, what do you think then happens to the trainees or the future lawyers that need to train? And what does training look like in the modern AI era for lawyers who might be using Orbital?
Yeah. This is a great question, and something I've heard asked at our own events, when I go out to conferences. I was just at Legal Tech in New York a few weeks back. Everybody's trying to figure this out. I think there was a time where there was, the naysayers of AI, it's never going to be smart enough, it can't do this. I think we've sort of crossed over that chasm, and we're now at a place of like, oh, hold on, how do we actually build up this context, this know-how? Old lawyers will retire eventually, and the new guard needs to take their place. How will they be trained? I don't think I have, unfortunately, George, sort of a magic answer for sort of how that will work here, because I think the industry is figuring that out. Maybe Legal is clearly different. There's, regulation, there's, what your clients expect of you, there's insurance, there's requirements that many other professions don't have. But if I do look to, I guess, my own profession in sort of software engineering, and again, this obviously doesn't apply one-to-one to legal, but there's always been this idea of like engineers knew exactly, they was really close to technology and they wrote really low-level code, and then we developed some new abstraction and it was a better programming language. And everybody was like, well, I'm now further away from the things I fully understand and I have to rely on technology that I didn't write myself. And it's been a story over my 20-year career. We've just been leveling up. And the latest one, at least in AI, we've now leveled up. We used to write code. We now write sort of natural language, sort of English sentences and paragraphs, and it writes code. And there's a lot of challenges in there. A lot of software engineers are still trying to figure out, when do I trust this, in what ways it can do cute prototypes, but what happens when I'm building secure applications. And I think if I have to map a portion of that into the legal profession, there's similar sort of discussions that are happening around how do we're never going to see sort of true transformation in legal and real estate legal unless we rely on the output of AI without being able to check every single thing. And today you have to, for either insurance or regulatory reasons. It's partly why if you can back AI with insurance, you at least solve that one leg of the tripod. We can't solve the regulatory side. That's more for sort of governments and to figure out. But I think that gets to sort of at least a point of it. What I mean by that is it's not necessarily going to solve training the new guard, but at least allows them to level up and say, I don't have to worry about this layer down here because I've got enough trust in how this is being built and I've seen it 1,000 times and there's enough insurance available that I can continue to rely on it. Having said that, there's still going to be, people who do need to be trained. The way I think about this maybe is right now, if you are billed out to a client, the client is essentially kind of the cost for you to a client is baked in, part of your training as well as sort of the work that you're doing. And that's always been sort of the model. So what happens if instead in the future AI does the work and you work alongside that? And obviously you need to get paid and the law firm needs to get paid for your sort of time, but you could almost have AI produce the work, you produce the work, and you could sort of check each other's homework and make sure. Ultimately humans can still train even if it's not sort of on the job doing the work that is ultimately delivered to a client, but they can do it alongside that. And so some of the discussions I've seen is people are talking about the old apprenticeship model where people would sort of go in and almost, I heard some sort of crazy thing the other day where people would like pay, the old apprenticeship model, you would pay for your son or daughter to go be an artist at some sort of wealthy person or some artist, and they would sort of train you over time. Now, I'm not sort of advocating necessarily that approach, but maybe that's what needs to happen, where humans can still train. It's just a question of ultimately who pays for that at the end of the day, and I think it's obviously going to be born into just like the law firm structure, and I think that training can probably change over time. But as I started with, I think there is no solution yet. Everybody's figuring that out.
And do you think, given it's a lot to do with the billable hour, do you think... But some of your clients who have maybe onboarded Orbital, do you think that their clients are spending less on them because they've bought an Orbital?
This was one of the more interesting discussions at Legal Week a couple of weeks ago. There's a portion of the room, whether it was at Legal Week 2 weeks ago or a year ago or every other conference, the death of the billable hour. And there's always somebody who stands up and says, look, we've been calling the death of billable hour now for like the last 2 decades. I think it's pretty valuable. And then somebody else pipes up and says, the reason the billable hour exists is because clients wanted transparency. They didn't just want, this is what it costs. They wanted to understand where was this time going and how can I, potentially optimize that. So the discussion at Legal Week 2 weeks ago was just, there is starting to become pressure from clients around, can I see on my bill where AI was used? If it wasn't used, I understand the price. If AI was used, what am I paying for exactly? And can I see a discount? Now, Obviously that is one-sided. Law firms, to your point, we were just talking about training. There's a lot of costs that they have to bear, but
Yeah.
there's starting to be sort of quite a bit of pressure. I think at least in real estate legal, this has already happened, especially in the UK. A lot of the work has turned into fixed fee work. And so one of the reasons, we've been adopted really well is because it was like, look, efficiency here is really valuable. Clients are paying X. We have humans that are billing out or sort of doing the work. And if we can make them more productive, this is better for everyone. Not all legal practice areas have that sort of same dynamic. And obviously there's different dynamics in the UK and the US where we both have customers. But you can see both the model works. This sort of fixed fee model works for some things. And there's a lot of pressure across the industry from clients to sort of find a way that it works. And obviously clients cost isn't the only motivator. Speed, there was a lot of talk of clients going, speed's actually much more important. People want to pay, they don't mind paying a lot of money for great work and really fast work. What they don't want to pay for is sort of work that's been done a million times, like, red flagging an NDA. And so it's sort of that sort of work that, I think the industry's figuring it out. And we'll see over time whether sort of that billable hour starts to feel sort of more compression or whether it sort of, stands the test of time. But I think AI does add a really interesting new ingredient into the mix that seems to be stirring the pot more than it has in the past.
Yeah, I was speaking to another legal AI founder, and he said for a lot of clients of law firms, they want great work, but they have nothing to compare it against. And so they just assume it's going to be great work. The thing that they can tell, the thing that is measurable, is the speed at which they get it back. If they get it back really fast, then people will happily pay a premium for fast, quick work. Because if you're getting work back to your clients quick, then that means you must be important to them, and they want to feel valued and they want to feel important, right? So.
Yeah. And can I give you another concrete example of real estate legal? Oftentimes when you're doing incredibly large portfolios, you're doing hundreds or thousands of properties. A pub chain is getting purchased in the UK and there's thousands of properties, or the railway arches, they're sort of selling a bunch of them. Oftentimes you physically cannot in the time, or it's just way too cost prohibitive to do the diligence on all those properties. And so real estate's always had this idea of like, okay, well, let's sample. Right? Let's do 10 or 20. Let's do the diligence on 10 or 20%, and then sort of infer roughly what that risk is across the estate. Everybody knows that doesn't work, and there's lots of sort of caveats in terms of where the liability ultimately lands when sort of some material risks. But there's this gap in the market with real estate where if I have a large portfolio, I either don't get to do the diligence I want. Or I have to spend way too much time and money doing it. And so AI can kind of add a third piece of like, oh, right, I can actually sweep over every single property and get some form of diligence. And I guess that's why whenever you get new technology, it allows you to sort of open up the market and solve problems that you maybe just physically couldn't solve before.
Now, zooming out, I want to look at Orbital's vision for the next 5, maybe even 10 years. Yeah. What is your vision with like how everything's going? Do you think we're going to have fully agentic systems in legal? I guess to get to that point, you need to be confident that the 1% is not going to hallucinate, because you can't accept that 1% needs to be fully 100% accurate. But yeah, how far do you think we are away from fully agentic systems where they can almost auto-approve what they have created?
So let me go back to something I said earlier and sort of break this down into sort of, again, it's simplified, but accuracy, regulation, and insurance. On the accuracy point, we now have large language models or AI that is essentially as good as a human when it comes to reasoning through text. Again, it's a little better in some areas, it's a little worse, but it's astonishing how far we've come since the launch of ChatGPT. And so from a sort of intelligence perspective, I think it's already there. It doesn't mean that you can just turn on ChatGPT and use it for everything and it's going to get the answer you want. That's not clear, but it's just the raw intelligence is there. You can't do this because it's a different thing, but if you kind of measure the IQ of a human and you measure the IQ of AI, oftentimes AI is sort of a little bit better. It breaks down that sort of a piece, but it sort of tells you that we are not at GPT 3.5 level back in the day, where it was clearly a human was smarter than it in every dimension. I think the piece with accuracy that isn't there yet is what in the industry people are talking about, the harness. You can imagine, you have very bright students who have very high IQ, but they know nothing about real estate legal. They need to go to university and they need to do an apprenticeship, that like what you're going through, and they need to kind of understand practically what does this mean, both theory and on the ground. And so a lot of these sort of harnesses or sort of educating AI how to think like a particular sort of domain expert, that's currently underway. It's what we're building. It's what many other companies are building in their domain. And so from an accuracy perspective, with half of it's there, but there's other pieces still getting built out. But I think that's just a matter of time. So I think the accuracy piece is kind of a solved problem. We'll see this play out in the sort of coming months and year. On the regulation side, Arizona in the United States have these sort of alternate business structures where you can have sort of non-lawyers set up a firm. We have that here in the UK since 2007. Okay. And I think 1 in 10 firms don't have sort of, they were able to sell legal services without having sort of lawyers in a partnership. And so I think it's starting to turn the tide, but at least in a number of places that regulation hasn't turned sort of completely. And also clients and consumers are still getting used to this new model and how it's operating. And I think like banks, legal's very important. I think this is clear to obviously the audience here, but you don't want to mess that up. There's some, especially if you're buying a house, that's by far the most important asset that anybody will buy. You want to go to somebody that you trust, much like you want your salary. Sorry?
And their most expensive assets.
100%.
Yeah.
And so I think regulation, as per usual, that will be slow, but we've seen lots of little things, and there's a lot of companies pushing to find the structure that works. And a lot of lawyers are even turning to these and sort of helping out. We obviously have real estate lawyers, many of them on our business here in the UK and the US, and they're sort of wanting to be a part of the future, but also use their incredible skills. And then finally, insurance. We've obviously got an insurance policy. Many other players are starting to figure out, and we will continue to sort of innovate on that as well. But I think to answer your question, how close are we? I think all three of those had to be solved. And I think accuracy, I can give you a rough, idea. Probably within the next year, we'll see massive advances. And I think you'll be hard to discern. It's hard to discern the difference between some real estate legal work and a human. It still needs to be reviewed by a human, and it's, in order to get insured and to be regulated. And so those things are sort of outside of necessarily the control. So I think it's a hard question to ask, like it'll be done by then. But I think those are the ingredients that you can see each one of them moving independently. Accuracy is moving the fastest. Insurance is probably hot on its tail, and you're seeing, you brought up the 11 Labs example. There's many other companies that we're talking to that are sort of innovating there. I think the regulation one has moved already, but it probably will be the slowest.
Now, Andrew, I saw you used to be a startup mentor at Seed Camp.
Yeah.
Now, for anyone that might be listening to this who maybe works in legal, or they're aspiring to found their own legal AI startup or any startup involving AI, what's perhaps one piece of advice, given your years of wisdom, that you'd give to them?
I'm going to try to get, I'm a very practical person, so I don't want to give sort of too overarching advice that maybe won't stand the test of time. But if we think about today, right, we're all obsessed with AI, we're obsessed with legal, we're trying to figure out, you asked this fantastic question about like, what do you do, for trainee lawyers and how do they get experience? So the thing that's interesting for me is I have a foot in two camps. I have a foot seeing our customers, real estate lawyers, real estate professionals, right at the sort of cutting edge of how their profession is sort of changing and how they're sort of servicing their clients. And I also have a foot in what's happening in software development. And if I think about sort of what's ahead, I think everybody has the opportunity to go and follow the sort of luminaries in software engineering. There's folks at Anthropic and OpenAI and sort of people outside of those companies using those tools. There's enough on YouTube and sort of X, if you follow people. X seems to be sort of the place where this stuff kind of breaks first. But software engineering, partly because of how these models are built, software engineering, like maths, is verifiable. You can get an AI to write code, and then you can test whether that code's correct, and the same you can do with maths. And it's no surprise that those two fields are sort of performing at the best level with AI. And so when you look at these professions, all you need to do is go, where's the tip of the spear? Who's, right at the front experiencing how this is changing individuals, companies, training people. What can you now do with these models? How intelligent are they? What sort of tasks they can do? All you need to do is sort of look at what the sort of bleeding edge software engineers are talking about, and then look at your own industry and I guess project how far behind are we. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is, again, I was in Legal Week 2 weeks ago, and for the first time, not just one person, but panel after panel, I started recognizing, pattern matching what lawyers were saying. And again, these are CIOs, chief innovation officers, and innovation teams and partners who are at the forefront. They were saying things that the software engineering community was saying 12 or 18 months ago. And so there's just a little bit of a lag. And I think that's just really interesting. And again, different industries will move at different times. But to be very practical, it's not like we need to gaze into a crystal ball and imagine what's going to happen. Just look to software engineering and you'll see it coming. And a lot of people have the defensive reaction of, it won't happen to us, it's structurally different. And I think there are definitely some strong arguments there as to why that might be the case. But given what I've just seen at sort of Legal Week, you get a very practical view into what's about to happen sort of 12, 18 months from now in real estate legal and the wider legal community.
Well, we saw a few months ago now in software engineering, the whole thing with like Claude and GPT being able to take over your screen. And
yes.
I think that is hopefully soon to come for maybe the Harvey and Lagoras, so I can go for my lunch break and it'll fill out a form for me on the government website or something. That'd be lovely.
Yeah, 100%. Like everybody has a software engineer in their pocket. Just to sort of throw out the sort of latest rage with sort of OpenClaw, it had many different names. This idea that everybody, like there were lots of security concerns with that, but lots of people are now working on what is the OpenClaw that is a much safer version for doctors, for lawyers, for everybody else. And I think ultimately everybody's going to have this little sort of agent where you can interact with just via WhatsApp or messages. And it can do work for you where you don't have to trawl through a website and click all the buttons. And when it doesn't know something, much like if you have a PA, it'll just get in touch and say, hey, Andrew, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know. I found a flight, but this flight is ludicrously more expensive than you thought. Do you still want to go ahead? And I'm like, well, I have to. I've got to go to Legal Week, so please buy it. Versus, if I'm on a family holiday, I'm like, maybe we'll just move the week because that's a little too expensive. And that'll be on flights. That'll be on food orders. That'll be on work tasks. That'll be reading your email. There's a lot of that work that ultimately I still need to direct the AI. The AI is not good enough to just, let loose, but it can do an incredible amount of tasks on my behalf that, quite frankly, is just grunt work for me. I don't want to read all my emails, but I have to. But if I knew an agent read all of them and surfaced the right things to me, that would be incredibly valuable.
Andrew, where can people find you after this podcast?
They can find me on LinkedIn or they can find me on Twitter. So I'm Andrew Thompson on LinkedIn. You can search for CTO at Orbital, or on sort of Twitter or X. I'm Andrew Thompson X. They can contact me there, see some of the content I have. I have a blog at our sort of company's website, which is tech.orbitalwitness.com, or my own personal blog at andrewthompson.co.
Very nice. Cool. Andrew, thank you so much.
AndrewThompson.com was taken. That's a fairly generic name, that Andrew Thompson. So
the Thompson surname.
Yeah, exactly.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to have you on.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much for your time, George. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.